All right, let's dive into a story that kind of reaches out to us through the mists of time. We're going to go on a journey to a world of faith that was, well, it was wild, deeply connected to nature, and ultimately almost completely lost to history. This is the story of Celtic Christianity.
It all starts with a legend we think we know, right? The story of Saint Patrick, the guy who famously drove all the snakes out of Ireland. You know, the snakes representing evil and all that. It's a tale that's become this huge myth, a real cornerstone of Irish identity. But like all great myths, it's hiding a much more dramatic and honestly a much more human story.
So who was he really? Not the character in the fable, but the actual man who was at the forefront of this spiritual revolution that would end up shaping the British Isles for centuries to come. To find him, we've got to look beyond the shamrock.
So let's do it. Let's peel back those layers of legend and meet the real Patrick. I think you'll find he's way more complex and, frankly, more compelling than any fable. See, Patrick's story doesn't start with sainthood. It starts with trauma. At just 14 years old, he was kidnapped from his home in Britain by Irish raiders. For six long years, he was a slave, totally alone in the cold fields, just watching over cattle. And it was in that despair that he turned to God. He started having these visions that urged him to escape. He eventually made it home, but he couldn't settle. He felt this absolutely undeniable pull to go back to the very land where he was a captive, not for revenge, but to bring a new faith. Just incredible.
Now, to really get what Patrick's mission was all about, we have to understand the world he was walking back into. This wasn't just any old place. This was the world of the ancient Celts, a people of deep spirituality and some pretty fierce contradictions.
You know, we often have this really romantic picture of the Celts, right? Gentle, nature-loving people. And look, they definitely had a deep connection to the natural world, but historical accounts from writers like Caesar and Diodorus, they paint a very different picture. They describe a people who were, and I quote, war-mad, a people who fought naked to terrify their enemies and who practiced a kind of head worship, venerating the severed heads of their foes as these objects of great power. They were a violent, tribal, and unbelievably formidable people.
And yet, underneath that warlike exterior was this profound spiritual depth. So much so that St. Augustine, one of the giants of the church, believed that their ancient religion already had the seeds of Christianity in it. He actually wrote that the true religion already existed among them. This spiritual readiness, that's the key to understanding why Christianity took root here in such a unique and powerful way.
So, when the Christian message finally arrived, it didn't just bulldoze the old ways. No, it blended with them, creating this vibrant, earthy, and distinctly Celtic kind of faith, a faith of the wild.
And a huge influence on this new faith came from a really unlikely place, the deserts of Egypt. Early Christians, who we now call the Desert Fathers, they sought God in these remote, isolated communities. And this tradition, this idea of a faith lived out in the wilderness, away from the big centers of power, it traveled with traders all the way across North Africa and Spain, and finally it landed in Ireland. And it resonated perfectly with the Celtic soul, valuing community, contemplation, and a life lived close to the elements.
Okay, here's a core difference in how they thought about the world. The Greco-Roman world, they tended to think in twos, in dualities. You know, black and white, good and evil. But the Celts, they thought in threes, in trinities. So for them, it wasn't just good and evil. There was also this neutral space in between. It wasn't just black and white, there was also gray. This gave them a much more balanced, more nuanced view of the world. And it meant that when they heard the Christian message of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it just clicked. It made perfect sense to them.
Now, Patrick may have lit the spark, but he was far from alone. A whole generation of remarkable men and women built this new church, and each one of them added their own incredible story to the tradition.
Let's start with Saint Bridget, the Mother Saint of Ireland. Now, in Celtic society, women held some serious power. They could own property, they could initiate a divorce, they could even be warriors. And Bridget, she embodied this strength. She founded the legendary double monastery at Kildare, this massive, self-sufficient community where men and women served together. The legend goes that she asked a local ruler for only as much land as her cloak could cover. He agreed, probably thinking it was a good deal, and then the cloak miraculously spread for miles, becoming the foundation for her incredible spiritual network. What a story!
Then you've got St. Columba. He was a noble-born scholar and a really passionate artist. And his love for books actually led to his downfall. Get this, he secretly copied a precious manuscript, and a dispute over who owned it just blew up. A battle was fought between his clan and the High King's followers, and thousands of people died. As penance, Columba was exiled from Ireland for life, and he was tasked with converting as many souls as were lost in that battle. He ended up settling on the Scottish island of Iona, founding a community that became this beacon of learning and faith for all of Europe. And we absolutely cannot forget St. Hilda of Whitby. A woman of royal blood, she became an abbess of such profound wisdom that kings and princes would seek her out for counsel. Her double monastery at Whitby was a center of learning that encouraged unbelievable creativity. In fact, she inspired this humble, stammering cowherd in her community to share a vision he'd had, and in doing so, he became the very first known English Christian poet, all thanks to her. So for a while, this vibrant, decentralized Celtic church just flourished. It grew right alongside the more structured, hierarchical Roman church that was spreading up from the south. But eventually, these two very different ways of expressing the same faith were destined to collide.
And the flashpoint came in the year 664 at this huge meeting or synod held at the monastery of, you guessed it, St. Hilda herself. This was the Synod of Whitby. This was the moment where the future of Christianity in Britain was going to be decided.
So here's the crucial point. This wasn't just about small disagreements. I mean, sure, on the surface, they were debating things like the correct date to celebrate Easter or what kind of haircut a monk should have. But those were just symbols of a much, much deeper cultural clash. This was a choice between a decentralized, nature-based faith that valued personal holiness and a hierarchical, urban-focused church that valued institutional order and uniformity above all else. Two totally different worlds.
Well, in the end, after a whole lot of debate, the king who was presiding over the synod chose the Roman way. The argument that really carried the day was about unity with the wider church, the one centered in Rome. And with that single decision, the distinctly Celtic expression of Christianity, it began to fade, slowly absorbed into the mainstream of European faith.
But the story doesn't end there. Not really. Because even though it was marginalized, the spirit of this lost Christianity never truly died. And today, its echoes are being heard more clearly than ever. So why? Why does this ancient path resonate so strongly with us right now? Well, I think it's because it offers things a lot of people are searching for. It's a bottom-up faith, right? It flows from your own personal experience. It's not dictated from the top down. It sees all of creation as sacred, viewing the world as this incredible web of life where God is present in every single plant and animal. It's creative, it's deeply human, and it just offers a model of faith that feels less institutional and maybe more authentic.
As one scholar put it, this ancient tradition might actually be far more relevant to our future than the models of faith we've inherited from the more recent past. It's offering a different way forward, a path that's been waiting patiently in the mists for us to rediscover it.
And that leaves us with a final thought. When we look back at this lost world of saints and scholars, of this wild faith and sacred nature, are we just studying history? Or could it be that in searching for this ancient spirituality, what we're actually searching for is a blueprint for our own future?